Hunters see some crazy things out there, but sometimes you hear of something a hunter wish he'd never seen. From nightmarish beasts to spirits that simply want to whisper in your ear. Today's episode features crawlers, hunting stories, and more. Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, and you should absolutely pre-order my upcoming book, Freaky Folklore, on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. It is a beautifully illustrated encyclopedia of your favorite scary monsters and cryptids from around the world. Link in the description. Enjoy today's stories, and don't forget to send me your encounters at darkstories.org. Now, let's begin. What's Wrong with Grandpa? From Lore Master 93. I live in New York State. I have my entire life, and this entire incident occurred shortly after my 20th birthday, about a week later to be exact. As I write this, I'm rounding the corner of 31, and I've looked back on this incident many, many times. I'm currently finishing up a degree in geosciences, and my thought process has always been the analytical kind, method-based. So I've thought of every possible reason for what occurred, and even the most logical can't explain everything I saw that day. To start, I grew up in a very abusive home. I wasn't close with my mother, stepfather, or sister, and for that reason, I grew very close with my maternal grandparents. They took me in and practically raised me. My grandfather was an extremely hard-working individual, at one point even holding down 3 full-time jobs, all while raising my mother and her 3 siblings. He was an army vet too. He had served during Vietnam, and one of the most loving people I'd ever known. He never swore nor raised his voice. He never had to. The man commanded respect in a way rarely seen. He was the kind of man that, even in retirement, would wake up at 4 a.m., do yard work and household chores until late in the evening, never slowing down. As I said before, I am currently finishing up a degree. I went back to college during the pandemic, so at the time I was kind of lost in an in-between state, having no idea what direction I wanted to go in my life. My friends were all off in college or in the military. I was kind of just alone. For whatever reason, I decided I wanted to try to go hunting. I'd never gone before, and quite frankly, I was bored. So I asked my grandfather if he would come with me. He was extremely hesitant, but eventually he said yes. I asked him if everything was all right, but he ignored my question. I decided I should ask my grandmother instead, just in case hunting in these woods with rifles would be a problem due to his military service. When I brought it up, she looked at me and said, "If he said he would go, that means he'll go. Don't question it, but if he tells you to do something out there, you'd better do it." Now, neither of my grandparents had a cold bone in their body, but both of them were rather cold towards me about this inquiry into going hunting. I ended up just shoving it off, waiting for my grandfather to give me a time when he was free. We settled on the weekend after my birthday, which would be in mid-August. He took me up north near an old camp his friend owned, about a 2.5-hour drive from where my grandparents lived. We had a great time driving up, laughing and joking around like we usually do. Nothing out of the ordinary. That was until we were about 20 minutes out from the site. My grandfather suddenly got very quiet, and his entire demeanor changed. He now seemed very tense, almost angry or agitated, something I chalked up to some type of PTSD or flashback. Well, shortly after I noticed his change, he began to pull the truck over, and when he stopped, I looked over at him, and my heart sank. He was staring right at me, with an almost insane look in his eye. And then he spoke, slowly and methodically, saying, "When we get there, you've got to promise me to do whatever I say when I say it. Do not ask questions. Do not hesitate. Just do it." When I began to reply, he cut me off and practically yelled, "Swear that you will listen to me." Keep in mind, my grandfather had never spoken to me like that before, nor anyone else as far as I could remember, and I was very taken aback there. I just nodded my head. He put the truck back into gear, and we kept on driving. About 15 minutes later, we pulled up, got out, and my grandpa seemed back to normal at this point. He was cracking jokes and making small talk. We took off into the woods, ready for our hunt. Hours went by, and we saw and heard plenty of small animals and birds, but no big game, probably because we were being far too loud. We arrived at the site relatively early, maybe 8 a.m. By the time we made the decision that we would head back, it was almost 7 p.m. It was a really great day for the most part. Sure, we didn't actually get to hunt anything, but spending the day in the woods with the man who practically raised me was fun and relaxing. That was until we came to this clearing. It was a small clearing that you could probably park 3 or 4 cars next to each other inside. My grandfather slowed down, and he put his arm up for me to stop, so I did. He lowered his gun and sort of hunched over, and then I could hear him sniffing the air, literally huffing it in. I had no idea what he was doing, or why. I just knew it was extremely odd to see him like that. He took a few steps forward, so I stood a ways behind him. This is when the story truly begins. My grandfather slowly turns around and looks at me, teeth bared, and he was breathing heavy. His eyes were wide, pupils huge, and as he looked at me, he said in a deep voice, "Run back to the truck. Now." I just stood there, confused. I didn't move at all. At that point, he had turned back around, his hands held high, almost in a claw-like gesture. He had dropped his gun altogether. He then screamed, facing away from me, "I told you to run!" This time, instantly, I turned right around and booked it. I had never run that fast in my life. I tripped several times and cut my knee pretty bad. It took me a while to get back to the truck, but I did. And when I got there, it felt like I couldn't breathe anymore. I threw myself into the passenger seat and slammed the door shut behind me, waiting. At that time, my grandfather was 70 years old, but he was in great shape for his age. However, he definitely couldn't move as fast as me, so I figured it would take a while for him to get back to the truck. At that point, I was beginning to feel horribly guilty for leaving my grandfather out there alone. So I went to open the door to go back for him. And that's when I heard it. A loud, high-pitched screeching. It sounded so alien, so unnatural. And that's when I also saw my grandfather absolutely booking it out of the woods. And I mean freaking sprinting, charging through the underbrush like it wasn't even there. He charged around the truck to the driver's side and practically threw himself in. When I looked at him, he was bruised up and bleeding. He was still baring his teeth like an agitated animal and breathing heavily. He almost seemed bigger too, like, I don't know, more muscular. Like less of an old man and more like a younger, stronger version of himself. Perhaps it was the adrenaline. I don't know. Maybe I was just seeing things. Before I could ask him what the heck happened, he threw it into reverse and we sped out of there. He refused to talk to me for the entire ride home. When we eventually pulled into the garage, he waited for the garage door to shut, and he looked at me, completely and utterly exhausted. I shook my head at him and said, "What the heck?" Then he said, and I remember this clear as day, word for word, "There are things out there that people are not aware of. Things that exist mostly in legends and stories, and all legends have some basis in fact." He then gave me a weak but warm smile, patted my shoulder, and said, "Don't ask me to take you hunting again. I'm too old, and don't tell your grandma what happened today." And that was it. I've never told anyone this story, not even my wife, and I don't plan to. I'll just post it here under a username, just to get it off my chest, and you all can make of it what you will. Boy in the Deer Stand. From Gamecock 711. I'm a 20-year-old guy from a rural part of South Carolina, in the Low Country. I won't give an exact place for obvious reasons, but I will tell you my whole family's from here. Currently, I live in a small town not too far from where I'm from. To sum it up so no one will get confused, my uncle, cousins, and aunt still live back at home, while me, my mom, my siblings, and stepdad live in this nearby small town. Now, I grew up hunting and fishing, mostly fishing, while my other family members mostly hunted. I'm currently writing this story on May 10th, 2024, and it's only been about 6 months since this creepy encounter happened. I've had a couple of experiences, the first one being not so bad, but the second was very scary, so that's the one I want to get into. I've always heard about sleep paralysis, but never really believed in it. I believe in spirits and ghosts, but for some reason, never anything like sleep paralysis. When I heard people could possibly wake up and not be able to move, and often see figures, I didn't pay it much mind. Maybe they were just vivid nightmares. But then, it happened to me. One night about 6 to 8 months ago, I was in my bed falling asleep, because I, of course, had to work the next day. Quick note, my brother and I share a room in our family's house. Anyway, I fell asleep with everything off in the room. I suddenly woke up sometime later with this loud ringing sound in my ears. I thought it was my alarm or something like that, so I opened my eyes and tried to check my phone, but I couldn't. In fact, I couldn't move at all. I started to freak out. I couldn't even talk. I could only look around. So I looked at my brother as he was sleeping, and while freaking out, I was thinking, how does he not hear that ringing? At this point, I feel paralyzed and somehow move the tip of my finger, and I'm able to snap out of it. I still wanted to scream and yell, but for some reason, I decided not to. I was too shocked by the experience, to be honest. I did tell my sister about it, and she knew immediately what it was. I didn't want to wake anyone up, so I just went back to bed. Nothing happened for a time after that. Fast forward a couple of months later. It was hunting season in South Carolina. For those who don't know, in our game zone, hunting season with a rifle starts August 15th through January 1st. It was like November, I'm gonna assume, and my cousin and I were going hunting on my uncle's land where I grew up. We planned to get up early before daylight, around 5 a.m., so we would be ready when the deer started coming out. I'm not a great morning person, at least not that early, unless it's for hunting or fishing. Then I'm raring to go. So that day we got up early and threw on our hunting clothes. I went and grabbed our guns. Then we discussed which stand we wanted to take. There were 4 total, and only 2 of us hunting that day. I chose to take the middle row stand. which is what we call it because it's basically in the middle of where the hunting area is. So we start walking in the woods. Soon he goes off to go to his own stand. Then I head to mine. It was 5:30 a.m. by that point, and I'm sure both of us were still tired. I make it to my stand, set my gun on the side, and basically wait for daylight to come out. I get on my phone and scroll through social media with my sound and brightness down. I lay my head to the side on the deer stand, tired but not tired enough to go to sleep. I close my eyes for about a moment when all of a sudden I hear this sound. I had my eyes closed, but I'm telling you I wasn't asleep. Wasn't far from sleep, but definitely I was still awake, enough to know what was going on. So I thought nothing of it, thinking it was my uncle's dog because sometimes he would make his way back in the hunting trail. But it's not like a dog running through the woods. No, this sounds more human, if you know what I mean. Maybe it's just me, but animals tend to not make as much noise as people do, carelessly walking through the woods. I was still trying not to think much of it, until I heard what sounded like a little boy singing. I listened closely, trying to figure out what he was saying, but I really couldn't tell. But I could tell he was definitely singing something. At this point, I didn't even want to open my eyes because I was so freaked out. Hearing a little boy sing while it's still dark in the woods. Screw that. I would have gotten out of the deer stand and just left. But at the moment, I felt safer in it. I heard him walk through the leaves on the ground, getting closer to the point where he was right behind my deer stand. Then all of a sudden, he stopped. I was thinking, what the heck? Then, there's no way this is actually happening. I gotta be dreaming. A couple minutes go by, and I hear the stepping again. But this time, it was coming up the deer stand steps. The deer stand sits up about 20 feet high with a built-in ladder for getting inside. All I hear is this supposed little boy coming up my ladder slowly and no longer singing. At this point, I'm an inch away from a heart attack. I thought to myself, I've got a gun, but if this is a ghost, that ain't gonna do no good. Finally, I heard him, or whatever it was, get up to the last step, like it was right on the other side of me with the wall of the deer stand blocking him. I kept my eyes closed, hoping I was in fact dreaming. I know this might sound unreal, but I kid you not. Out of nowhere, a little boy's voice came right into my ear, saying something really fast, like he was right there beside me, whispering in my ear. Whatever he said was so quick, I couldn't understand a word of it. I snapped out of whatever trance I was in, and everything stopped. I still stayed in the stand until the hunt was over. Neither me nor my cousin got anything. I did tell him about it, and basically all my family besides my uncle. As for him, I knew he would just laugh at me. But everyone else, for the most part, seemed to believe my story. But they don't take it as seriously as I do. Can't say I really blame them. No one knows how scary an experience really is, unless it happens to them. Now, I still go hunting these days. Not gonna let something like that scare me off forever. But it definitely shook me. I always ask myself, though, was it sleep paralysis? I don't think I was asleep. Was I in some kind of trance? Or could it have simply been a ghost? I still wonder what it said to me. I have no good explanation. Although I was never harmed by either of these events, I don't wish them on anybody. It's just creepy, man. The Odd One Out, from Peanut Butta Thugga. This happened in 2022, and still my memories are a bit fuzzy. Some stuff I don't remember, but I'll try to explain everything to my best knowledge. My friends and I'll call them Cole, Jackson, Aaron, Maddie, and Hudson, every year meet up a few miles deep in a forest near our town and camp out there for 2 to 3 nights. When we were younger, we built 2 separate 2-story small log houses. We'd always play in there and chill out. We haven't been there in a while because of school, so it was a little run down, but it was still in good condition, just a bit of plant life growing around it. When we got there, we first noticed an abhorrent smell floating in the air. It smelled, well, like a dead body. We searched the area, and a few minutes later, Maddie gasped. I was concerned, so I went right over, and there, lying on the ground, was a dead deer. But not your typical deer carcass. This one looked like it had been tortured or something. Its limbs were ripped off and shoved down its throat. I told the rest of my friends to come over and take a look. We were all frozen, in shock of what we were looking at. After a while, we made the risky decision to remove it by taking it down to the nearby lake to get it out of sight. Still, though, after that, we were all on edge. We started to come up with theories of what might have happened to it. Jackson suggested it was a bear or something, but no bear does that to its prey. At least, not to my knowledge. We were all kind of creeped out by that evening, but the atmosphere changed later that night when we were sitting around the campfire, having some beers and burgers. We were all getting a bit tipsy, and we started to share scary stories. Cole told us about the Wendigo, a so-called mimic and alleged shapeshifter that can lure people in by calling their names or asking for help in the voices of loved ones. We were all skeptical about the idea, since it was just a legend, but Cole tried to insist it was true. We shrugged this off and continued to hang out until we all got tired. Then we headed for bed. We set up camp in the 2 wooden structures that were cleaned a few hours before. We stayed up talking for a few minutes before we all passed out, drunk. We woke up around 4 a.m. for the day ahead of us. We got ready for a hike, then set out on a trail that we'd always take as kids. It was a little spooky since we never walked this trail at dark before. A few minutes into the walk, Jackson said he needed to use the restroom. Hudson volunteered to go with him, but he said that he would catch up with us in a few minutes. We parted ways, talking about school and politics and whatnot. Suddenly, Jackson emerged from the woods, and we greeted him, but we quickly noticed something was off. Jackson looked a little skinnier than before. Jackson has a small beer belly, for context, but for some reason, he looked more in shape. I thought that I was hallucinating. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me in the dark. Jackson said he had finished up quickly, and we said okay. We started to walk again for about 2 minutes, continuing to talk. But for some reason, Jackson remained quiet after that. He kept staring ahead at the trail. My phone rang at some point. It said, Jackson. That's creepy, I thought, and curiously I answered. Hey man, I think I got lost. Where are you guys at? I stopped, confused. The others stopped as well, concerned by my expression. The Jackson I could see just stared at me. What? You're right here. What are you talking about? I didn't even reach you yet. We all looked up slowly at Jackson, and by then, he was smiling. He just walked off into the woods, disappearing in the trees, and as soon as we could no longer see him, there came a scream from the same direction. The rest of us ran, scattering into the forest. I quickly found myself in a clearing, illuminated only by moonlight. There I found Aaron. He ran past me. But as he did, I saw something on all fours pursuing him. I ran in the opposite direction. I heard commotion all around me. I booked it back to where I thought the campsite was. It felt like forever, but I finally made my way back. I drank some water in a mad panic, before eventually Cole called us in a group chat. Me and the rest of my friends picked up, save for Hudson and Aaron. Everybody sounded out of breath, and from Cole's end, I could hear more screaming. Hudson texted the group at one point, saying that he thought he was being watched. He said that he saw what happened after I left. Apparently, Aaron had tripped, and something came after her. I told everyone I was back at the campsite and to meet me there. We stayed on the call. At one point, Hudson began to talk about how he might die, then hung up. My stomach was in shambles with how worried and terrified I was. But one by one, everyone began to show up at the campsite. Hudson and Aaron, too. Everyone had their own story to tell. Jackson said he had heard the screaming. Cole said after we split ways, the creature chased him for a minute, before going after Hudson. He said he saw the thing chasing Cole from behind one of the structures, until that monster chased after him, before finally going after Aaron. Maddie said she saw it, but it didn't chase after her. Hudson apparently had a deep cut on his arm, stating that that thing had reached him and done that to him. We very quickly packed up and left, calling the police on our way out. We haven't been back since. A part of me says if I do go back there, something bad is definitely gonna happen to me. It's 2024, and we still haven't gone back. My friends and I keep in touch, but those woods in particular are forbidden. My encounter with a Moehau Man. From Ash. When I was 8, I used to camp in my small backyard every night during the summer. Even though I'm now 21, I still remember this like it was yesterday. To provide some background, my family had a 4-person tent, which my brother and I were allowed to set up to sleep in either the backyard or our lounge. This particular summer, my brother wasn't interested in hanging out with me, likely because he had gotten to the age where it was seen as uncool to hang out with your little sister. The backyard could fit the tent with about 1 meter, or about 3 feet, of space between its side, and then an additional 2 meters between the other side and the house. The area had only just been transformed from farmland to a residential area, only about 15 years back, so there were still patches of native forest around. In the small country of New Zealand, on the main islands, the only thing to look out for is the one venomous spider, which is incredibly rare, and the last death from it was in 1923. It was safe to leave the back door unlocked, as there weren't many people around, and we all knew the neighbors. The story starts with me impulsively deciding that I wanted to sleep outside. I'd done so the previous night, so the tent was still up, with everything that I needed. I had gone to the tent with a torch and some snacks, and I jumped on top of the blow-up mattress, putting the thin blanket over the top of me. It was too hot for a sleeping bag. I fell asleep just as the sun was setting, as I still had a bedtime of around 7 p.m. My sleep, unfortunately, did not last too long. I was awakened to heavy bipedal steps circling the tent in pitch darkness. I didn't have anything to be able to tell the time, so I had no clue the exact time. But I could tell that all the lights in the house were out, meaning it was past 11 p.m. I thought maybe it was my brother playing a prank on me, as that was something we used to do. I soon realized the footsteps were too loud, too heavy to be his. I then concluded it must be my dad. My dad had never done anything like that before, though, so I was still confused. I then decided to call out, "Dad?" It was just loud enough so he could hear. Instead of hearing his familiar voice, I heard a primitive growl back, a sound that haunts me to this very day. I took hold of my teddy bear and held it close to my chest, trembling. No human could make that sound. I silently cried as I heard that thing outside scratching at the side of my tent. The growls were like a gorilla, if one had perhaps been possessed by a demonic entity. The deep growl, and sometimes even laughter, circled the tent, the creature scratching at the sides as it went. It felt like forever in my mind, but I'm sure it only lasted a few minutes, after which everything went silent. The hoots of the owl which hung around the property were no longer there, and the croaks of frogs in the nearby creek went silent. All the normal nightly sounds were gone. I, for some reason, thought I was safe then, and I took in a deep breath. But as soon as I did, something hit the side of my tent. In the morning, I would find out it was a rock, but at the time I had no clue. But I heard more and more things hit the tent, which turned out to be rocks. I continued to hold my breath. I was trembling more and more as things were continuously thrown at me, or rather, at the tent. I was too scared then to cry. As suddenly as it started, the assault stopped. There was again absolute silence for a while, before suddenly the laugh, or what sounded like a laugh, of this creature disrupted the peace. It began to run closer as the footsteps and laughter got louder. I pulled the blanket up over the top of my head, and I hugged my teddy bear so tightly I was struggling to breathe. The footsteps stopped, and the laughter grew quiet. But then I saw the zipper on the front of the tent beginning to open. At that point, I remembered my flashlight. I grabbed it, sitting up and pushing my back against the opposite side of the tent. I heard the fabric being pulled down, meaning the door was being pulled open. I turned on the light with pure terror, aiming it directly at the now open door. The laughter stopped, and I stared at a face illuminated by my light. Its eyes were like never-ending pits of darkness, and the face was too uncanny to be human. I watched it raise a large ape-like arm, which was holding onto a sharp rock, using it to pierce my air mattress. I screamed. It then placed both arms into the tent, staring at me like I was food. I heard the unmistakable sounds of my father running down the stairs inside the house, which caused the creature to freeze. Then it scampered away. My dad found the rocks surrounding the tent. Then he found me shaking inside. He looked at the deflated air mattress and simply picked me up and took me back inside to sleep with him and my mom for the remainder of the night. The next morning, I was still terrified. Yet he tried to tell me it was just a possum, and I hadn't closed the tent properly, so that's how it got inside. I mentioned the rocks to him when I saw them surrounding the tent, and he frowned, saying I must not have remembered putting them there. Now, I did like collecting random rocks, so it was believable that I might have placed them there. But believe you me, I didn't do it. I decided to finally talk about this encounter after listening to many episodes of this podcast. The only other person I mentioned this to was my brother, who said he had seen the creature too, but he only admitted it a few weeks back. He said that was why he refused to sleep outside. I now know this creature was a Moehau Man, a cryptid of New Zealand who feeds on and scares people in its territory. I likely would have been its food had my father not heard my scream that night. And ever since this event, I refuse to go camping. I do hope this serves as a reminder that even the smallest of places has its cryptids and things that science simply can't explain. Skinwalker in West Palm Beach. From Angela T. I would always see paranormal things growing up. This would be one of the last. I was maybe 15 to 16 years old, living in a popular city, and because of that, I didn't think anything like this would happen. But I'm quite sure of what I saw that night. Maybe the place it happened doesn't really matter. I know what I saw wasn't human. It was late one night. I woke up needing to use the bathroom. I have a habit of looking into the living room at night, trying to scare myself. I was always into the paranormal, so it was kind of a thrill. And anyways, how could I not? The open hallway there lets you see straight into the living room, and curiosity always made me want to look anyway. On that night, I get the scare I was self-consciously looking for. I walked out of the bathroom after finishing up, and I took another glance into the living room. And there, I saw very clearly a pair of eyes staring back at me in the dark. These were not human eyes. These were shiny, bright eyes. Whatever it was sitting on the couch in a crouched down fetal position, with its body turned away from me, but its head was turned around to look. I think it heard me when I first left the room to use the bathroom. I could see it well and how it looked. The kitchen light in my apartment made it easy for me to see, and that visual has been burned into my mind. Its eyes were reflecting this very bright light compared to what little light was actually shining on it from the kitchen. Its body was quite pale, and it looked human in shape, but definitely wasn't. It had no hair and was nude and skinny. It looked like if it stood, it would be quite tall, maybe 6 feet. I didn't freeze, but I did stare. I looked at this thing as it watched me walk into the room and close my door. Really, I didn't know how to feel. But I wasn't scared, I was in shock. And as I lay down, I thought to myself, what did I just see? Was that real? At that point, I was completely awake. So I knew it was. And still, for some reason, I wasn't scared. More so just worried, thinking if it was going to get my family. I knew not to go out and check. Instead, I ignored it, pretended it didn't happen, and went back to sleep. The next morning, there was no sign of it ever being here. I don't know why it was me that had to see it. I'm not sure how it got in or how it got out, but I do know I'll never forget this encounter. West Virginia Crawler. From Appetite for Fight. This is something that happened to me a few years back. I was out hunting on my dad's property in rural West Virginia. It's a big stretch of land, mostly dense forest with some steep cliffs and deep caves scattered throughout. I'd been hunting there since I was a kid. I thought I knew those woods like the back of my hand, but as it turns out, there was something out there that I never could have imagined. It started with little things. I began to hear odd sounds at night, strange cries that didn't quite sound like any animal I recognized. I chalked it up to the usual noises of the forest, maybe a coyote or a mountain lion passing through. But then I started to find things. Half-buried, half-eaten animal carcasses. Deer and rabbits that looked like they'd been torn apart but never completely devoured. It was unnerving, but again, I figured it must have been some predator marking its territory. One evening just before dusk, I saw something that made my blood freeze. I was perched up in my tree stand, scanning the undergrowth for signs of movement, when I caught the slight flicker of something pale. It looked human at first. It was darting between the trees. I thought it must have been another hunter, perhaps, maybe someone trespassing. But the more I looked, the more I realized this thing was moving all wrong. They weren't running or walking. No, they were scuttling and crawling in a way that I'd never seen a person do. It was hard to make out details in the fading light, but what I could see was enough to make my skin crawl. As I said, the thing was vaguely man-shaped, but its limbs were very long and thin, its body too lean, too sinewy. And the way it moved, it resembled more a spider, scrambling over fallen logs and up the sides of trees with this terrible but somehow natural and unnatural at the same time grace. I sat there, frozen, hardly daring to breathe as I watched this thing just skitter through the underbrush. It paused for a moment, head swiveling in my direction, and I swear I saw a glint of pale, pupilless eyes staring back at me. Then, quick as a shadow, it vanished into the deepening gloom of the woods. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen at first. Not sure people would believe me. They would probably say I was seeing things or maybe mistaking something for something else. Even I couldn't quite wrap my head around it. But I did do some research, dug into some old legends and folklore. That's when I came across similar stories of the crawler. According to them, the crawler is a creature that's been haunting these woods and other woods around the country for generations. Some say it's a demon, others a ghost or a twisted nature spirit. But they do describe basically the same thing. A gaunt, pale humanoid that moves with an eerie, inhuman agility, stalking the forests, preying on unwary animals, and allegedly, sometimes people. The more I read about it, the more unsettled I became. The stories were way too similar to mine, too consistent across decades of sightings and encounters. I began to wonder maybe there was some truth to it. Maybe the thing I'd seen scuttling through the trees that evening was more than just a trick of my mind or of the light. I kept hunting on my dad's land, but I was warier now, always on the lookout for a flash of pale skin or the skitter of long, spindly limbs. It wasn't long before I saw the crawler again. This time I spotted it at the edge of a clearing, crouched over the half-eaten remains of what looked to be a deer. It looked up as I approached, milky white eyes boring into me. Then it let out a sound that made my hair stand on end. This high-pitched wail that echoed through the trees like a banshee. I raised my rifle, hands shaking as I aimed at it. But before I could fire, the crawler had skittered off. Soon enough, I couldn't see it through the shadows of the forest. I kind of had this realization then. This creature wasn't something just supernatural. Rather, it was something that lived in these woods, something natural to them. I hope that makes sense. I started to spend more time out there. I set up trail cameras and motion sensors. I tried to gather some proof of the crawler's existence. But, of course, as these things go, I came up empty-handed. I never did see the crawler again after that. I think I could still hear it from time to time, but I couldn't be sure. To this day, I still haven't shaken the feeling that I'd brushed up against something that was extraordinary. Nowadays, my obsession has faded. I didn't spend as much time out there in the woods, and I focused on normal things like I used to. You can write off my story as just another tall tale. Maybe that's all it was, in the end. But I do know what I saw out there in those woods was real to me. While we were alone, from Shady German. I have a friend named Felix. A few years back, we had a sleepover together, and during it, something happened. Our parents are great friends, and so they agreed for us to have a sleepover at his place. Though when I told my other friends, they were a bit skeptical, as I'm a girl and Felix is a boy. We were 13 years old, and we never had those kinds of intentions. His parents were gone, and it was only us, his older brother, and his brother's friend, who were both 17 at the time. His older brother Bastian, and Bastian's friend Lucas, were told to watch us, so we didn't get up to no good. Looking back now, we definitely weren't the reason all this happened. Now, Felix and Bastian's place was fairly big. It was 2 stories tall and had a basement below that. The place was also surrounded by woods. The bedroom we stayed in was on the highest floor. It was actually Bastian's room, as Felix's room was in the basement, and I simply refused to sleep down there, as I hated basements. You never know what lurks in the dark. "Hey Finn, do you like Fast and Furious?" Lucas asked after we were all settled on the bed and had 2 air mattresses on the floor for me and Felix. Lucas never called me by my full first name. He said he thought Finn was cuter. "Yeah, I do," I answered. "Yeah," Lucas yelled, and I don't think I ever saw someone put on a movie so fast. One movie later, Bastian mentioned he was hungry. He said he would order something to eat, and asked what we wanted. Can we have pizza?" A half-asleep Felix asked as he rubbed his eyes. "Sure thing, Sleepin' Beauty," Bastian chuckled. A few minutes later, he finished his order and told us that he and Lucas would be driving to go get the pizza. "All right, you two, you know the drill. Don't open the door to strangers. Don't burn down the house. Blah, blah, blah." Lucas babbled as they walked out of the room. "Hey, Finn," Felix said next to me, in a very tired voice. "Can you stay awake while I take a nap?" That basically meant, can you keep guard while I sleep, because I'm scared something will happen. "Yeah, sure," I answered. And soon I heard light snoring next to me. So I put on a TV show and relaxed. Normally, it would take around 1.5 hours for the guys to get to the pizza place and come back altogether. So I was surprised when I began to hear knocking from the entryway door. From the room window, you could see the front door. I was just about to go downstairs to open the door, but then realized one thing. The boys had a key. They would not have to knock. I then heard a voice that didn't sound quite like Lucas, but it tried to be.
"Vinya, open the door."
It couldn't be him. Again, he never called me by my full first name, not even when he was angry. I froze and held my breath. The only things that could be heard then were Felix's light snoring and someone outside calling to me.
"Come on, it's me, it's Lucas."
I felt scared, but also mad. I was scared for obvious reasons, but the anger was from the fact that someone was trying to imitate a good friend of mine. But then came a new voice, one that I didn't expect.
"Sweetheart, it's us. We've come to pick you up."
My mother? What in the world? I thought. I heard the voice come again, asking for me to open up the door. Then the same request, this time from the Lucas voice. Did that mean there were 2 entities outside? 2 people trying to break in, imitating my loved ones' voices? But the voices were eerily similar. Were they even human? Suddenly I heard Felix waking up. I rushed back to him. He heard the voices then too. I covered his mouth quickly to quiet him down. I didn't want him to respond. He just looked at me with wide blue eyes, as if trying to ask me what the heck was going on. I put a finger to my mouth, motioning him to stay quiet, and he nodded, I removed my hand, and he whisper yelled, "Who the heck is that? Why are they trying so hard to sound like Lucas and your mom?" I replied, "Don't freak out. I don't know." Suddenly, we began to hear scratching at the door. I slowly, and I mean very slowly, got up and walked over to the window. That's when I saw them. 3 figures at the front door. I could only see parts and silhouettes as it was so dark, but the light being cast from the porch light helped a bit. They were all quite tall, and each of them had arms that seemed way too long for their bodies. I couldn't see their faces, but they did appear to have not eaten for some time. They just looked wrong, and they definitely weren't my mom or Lucas or Bastian. I was so terrified then, and confused. I stood frozen there. I whispered, "Felix, call your brother right now, but be quiet." He did as I said, and I began to cautiously retreat to the bed, where we had just been happily sitting and laughing only an hour ago. "Sup, Felix?" I heard Bastian's voice answer. He was completely unaware of what was going on at his own home. I mean, how could he know? I took the phone and whispered in a shaky voice, "Bastian, there's someone or something outside. They're pretending to be Lucas and my mom. They're trying to get in." I was on the verge of tears. "What? Finn, show me," he said. I stood up again and went to the window. I turned the camera and pointed it outside. I heard him gasp. I turned back and sat next to Felix, who was under a blanket now. I got under it with him and began to cry quietly. "Okay, listen, we're on the way home. We'll be there in 15 minutes. Stay quiet and keep the doors locked." After the longest 15 minutes of my life, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I then heard the door unlock, and when I saw Bastian and Lucas, I was so happy. Bastian called his parents, telling them I'd had a panic attack. He lied, of course. We agreed it was probably best not to tell anyone what happened. At worst, we simply watched a scary movie and freaked ourselves out. But I know what we experienced. I don't think I'll ever forget those voices. Am I haunted? From Bethy555. I've been seeing, hearing, and feeling things since as far back as I remember. The earliest memory I have of something paranormal is my own imaginary friend. Growing up, I had my middle sister, who's only 2 years younger than me, but as anyone with siblings knows, sometimes you both don't want to play outside or do what the other one is doing. So when that happened, I would play with my friend, a friend I called Mary. At first, my parents thought nothing of Mary, just that I had an active imaginations, kids being kids. I would play cops and robbers, run through the woods, even have tea parties with Mary. To me, she was just another kid who wanted a friend. One day in September, in 1998, my 7-year-old self decided I wanted to build a fort. Mary and I built a fort using mine and my sister's blankets, and even my mom and dad's blanket off their bed. It was huge, and I remember playing in there all day. Even my sister joined us at one point. Now, my sister couldn't see Mary, and a lot of times that fact upset me. But Mary would always tell me she was there because she knew I needed her. I would smile and just keep playing, not thinking much of it. One night, not long after the fort, I was lying in bed. My sister and I shared a room at the time, so my twin bed was on one side of the window while hers was on the other. From my bed, I could look into my parents' room, and if their bedroom door was open, I could see into the living room just past the front door. I remember being sleepy and closing my eyes after my dad read us a story. I don't know how long I slept before waking back up. I just remember waking up. It was late and still dark out. I lay there awake when I began to hear walking. My mom was a night shift nurse at the time, so I first assumed she woke up to go to the bathroom or get some water, maybe even to get ready for work. I sat up to look when my breath caught in my throat. Standing in my parents' doorway was a tall, misty figure. It looked feminine, but I couldn't see the face, only an outline. I lay back down. I threw my blanket over my head like any kid and began to cry quietly. The few days before, when I'd built my fort, I had accidentally put a hole in my blanket, so I shifted myself under my blanket so I could look at the figure without having to uncover my head. I saw the misty figure beginning to float towards my parents' bed, where I knew my dad was sleeping. It then knelt next to him. The figure stayed there for a long time, not making any sounds, just kind of hovering next to my dad. When it finally stood up, the figure floated into my room, going between mine and my sister's beds, before disappearing into the wall next to mine. I remember crying and wanting to get up, and Mary was next to me. She got on my bed and told me we should rest, that she would be there for me when I needed her. I woke up the next morning telling my dad and mom everything, even my grandma. While my mother, who is skeptical, brushed it off, my grandma and dad searched the house. Then my grandma asked me to describe Mary to her. I told her my friend was an African-American girl close to my age. Her hair was braided in 2 pigtails, and her clothes were kind of weird, like an old flour sack. I said that she had a mark over her right eye like a scar I got when I fell off my bike. My grandma looked at me, and I swear I thought she was going to cry. My dad looked at my grandma and asked if she was okay. My grandma wouldn't tell me then, but later in life, she would explain to me. The description I gave her was the same as her friend who had gotten killed while they were playing in the woods when my grandma was just a little girl. The figure I saw, nobody understood what it was, until one day in late October of the same year. My sister and I left for school, telling my dad and my mom goodbye. My mom was heading off to work, and my dad was off for the day, so he lay back down to take a nap after we got on the bus. But that would be the last time I ever spoke to my dad. He passed away in his sleep that day, and when I got home from school, everyone was at my house. I didn't understand at first until I saw Mary in my room and I asked her what happened. She told me that my dad was in a better place, that she would stay with me until I no longer needed her. After this experience, I would have vivid dreams. I dreamt of people passing away before they passed away. 2 years after this, in May of 2001, I had a dream about my papa, my dad's dad, and he passed away shortly after. Once I turned 11 or so, I stopped seeing Mary, but I still to this day have these dreams. The most recent one was my uncle and my boyfriend's mom back in 2022. I even dreamt of losing my child before I ever found out I was pregnant. I'm not sure if it's just coincidence, or maybe I have a gift or curse. But sometimes the dreams I have are not pleasant nor nice. Sometimes I do want to keep dreaming. Either way, I guess I feel haunted sometimes because the shadows and figures I see in my dreams have started to show up while I'm awake. Has anyone else ever dealt with something like this? Honestly, I really just want some clarification or answers. Is something wrong with me? Thank you for tuning in to Unexplained Encounters. If you're not already, follow and listen to Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Leave us a rating while you're at it. Get some cool creepy merch at eeriecast.store. Check out my other show where I narrate scary work stories. It's called Tales from the Break Room. For more terrifyingly entertaining shows from EerieCast, go to eeriecast.com. And if you want to listen to Unexplained Encounters and all the other EerieCast shows without pesky ads, sign up for EerieCast Plus at eeriecast.com/plus. You'll also get exclusive access to horror audiobooks only available to EerieCast Plus members. And you'll get 20% off our EerieCast.store merch through our members-only monthly discount code. Finally, if you have a scary story of the unexplained, send it to me at darkstories.org. I think that's about it. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.